Hi everyone. Today I'll be presenting on the banking regulations based on the Basel III Accord. Basel I, as a rule, was introduced in July of 1988. It was revolutionary as it provided a platform for banks to address risk management from its perspective of capital adequacy. Basel I, in comparison to Basel II entry, is not as risk sensitive. Basel I is deemed to be backward-looking as its main scope of coverage is looking to assets that exist rather than just looking into a bank's future composition. This enables the detection of credit risk and no other risks. Basel I also causes various classes of assets to have risk weights that are fixed and predetermined. Certain examples mentioned are cash with a risk weight of 0%, uninsured residential mortgage loans with a risk weight of 50%, and corporate loans with a risk weight of 100%. Basel II, as a rule, was introduced sometime in December of 2007. As compared to Basel I, Basel II is rather forward-looking in a sense that capital calculations is handled with a risk-sensitive approach. A three-pillar approach pertaining to risk management was introduced. There are namely three pillars in this Basel II Accord. Pillar 1, basically it enforces a bare minimum for capital requirements regarding operational, credit and market risks. Pillar 2, enforcement, contains the necessary principles for banks' internal capital adequacy assessment process, also known as ICAP, required for the identification of extra risks which are material and not recognizable easily. 3 is comprised of reporting requirements being enhanced for the sake of market disclosures. Scenarios include the securitization holdings, credit quality and rating bands credit risk exposure. Basel III, which was implemented in around somewhere in July of 2013, the main emphasis for this would be a reduction of systemic risks through the minimization of pro-cyclicity and promotion of counter-cyclicity through conservation of capital and using counter-cyclical buffers. The advantage of Basel III is that it's forward-looking as risks being addressed are specific to portfolios of banks as well as the macroeconomic environment. Leverage ratios are brought into the frame with the purpose of improving resilience within the financial system by limiting the leverage of a banking organization. Basel III also introduces a 30-day liquidity ratio, also known as LCR, 1-year net stable funding ratio, also known as NSFR, and tools that monitor liquidity. Now, taking US as a case study example, Basel III implementations began in July of 2013. Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform implemented the Basel III framework in the US. The main aim of the US to bring about such a change by taking reference from the EU was to bring about revision to the definition of regulatory capital, implementation of new requirements for the overall capital requirement, addition of a new supplemental leverage ratio, as well as making corrections to the methodology used for the determination of risk-weighted assets. Although in terms of cross-border regulations between the EU and the US are somewhat similar in terms of implementations of Basel III, there are still some significant disparities present between them. One such example is the Dodd-Frank Act, which introduced provisions which is only specific for financial institutions present in the US. Another point to take note is that the differential in asset risk weightings between the EU and US would create competitive dynamics between financial institutions located in both regions. This would make way for arbitrage opportunities to be present between them. As most of the global banks have their headquarters based in the US, it is important to take note of any liquidity risk arising, which could make way for another financial crisis to occur. In conclusion, Basel III is still the most important response addressing financial crisis that has been recognized internationally. The upcoming Basel IV framework, which has better policies that will suit the US, whether or not be adopted by them still remains a question.